Hello, everyone. Welcome to All Things College and Career, the podcast to turn to for all of your college and career planning needs. We are your hosts, Meg Gary
and Bobby Ryan,
owners of academic and career advising services located in Kennebunk, Maine.
We started this podcast to provide helpful information to listeners researching careers, colleges, or academic majors. Choosing your career or college is such a big decision, which is why our motto is learn before you leap. Before investing a lot of time or money, it's so important to do your research and to really explore your options.
Each podcast will offer interesting stories and valuable insights that we think you will find entertaining and informative.
Subscribe to our podcast and you'll have it ready to go on your playlist every Monday morning. So, learn before you leap each week with us. Have you ever thought about becoming an international teacher? If so, then this podcast is for you. I can't imagine finding a person with more experience teaching abroad than today's guest, Emily Butterworth. We are so excited to have her on our show today. Emily has taught in Seoul, Korea, Maracaibo, Venezuela, and is currently teaching in Medellin, Colombia.
Emily, who is originally from the U.S., has traveled the world and really understands various cultures more than most people I know. She is so entertaining and such a great storyteller. So even if you have no interest at all in teaching abroad, you will definitely enjoy hearing her tales, such as how she ended up playing for the Korean national rugby team. I mean, that was a crazy story.
I know, I loved that story.
Emily provides tips on the application and interview process for international teaching, and she also lets you know what the best job fairs are to attend and much, much more. So let's get started with our conversation with Emily. Hi, Emily. Welcome to All Things College and Career. Thanks so much for doing the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, Em, where are we talking to you from?
Right now, I'm in my apartment in Medellin, Colombia.
Wow. So for the listeners that don't know who you are, can you please introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Emily Butterworth. Right now, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching internationally for on and off, but mainly on for about 12 or 14 years now. And I teach high school English at an American international school in Medellin, Colombia. Medellin's the second biggest city in Colombia after the capital, which is Bogota. And yeah, I don't know, I'm 37 years old. I've been living in several different countries in my time abroad. So I started off in South Korea and I would live there for on and off for about 4 years. And then I lived in Maracaibo, Venezuela, and now I live in Medellin, Colombia. But I've spent time in many other countries in between. So yeah, I have a passion for teaching and a passion for traveling and just experiencing new cultures.
Oh my gosh, that's such a crazy experience that fascinating and so interesting that so few people have. We want to dig into that in depth, but let's just start out somewhat from the beginning. So after high school, you went to Bates, and I was just wondering if you could tell us a few things about Bates for any listeners out there that may be considering going to Bates. If you had anything to share about that.
Sure. So when I was an undergraduate, like when I was in high school, I started looking at colleges probably in my junior year of high school, and I just had an affinity with Bates. Several other colleges in that same NESCAC grouping of colleges. I think there's 10 colleges in that. And so I applied to several schools. Bates was a school I ended up choosing to go to. And yeah, my 4 years of undergrad there were absolutely fantastic. I met a lot of great people. And, you know, obviously you guys already know how beautiful Maine is. So it was great to be in Maine. And
yeah, we're glad you chose the state of Maine, Emily.
Actually, when I was an undergrad, I didn't have like a clear direction of where I wanted to go after I graduated. In fact, I was an education minor. So I'd done a lot of student teaching in my time while I was a student there in the public schools around Lewiston and Auburn. And I was actually a psychology major. So when I left school, I wasn't sure where I was going to. The most I got out of Bates in many ways was just kind of the idea to be a creative thinker and to kind of keep an open mind about options in the future. So I think that's served me well. I think there's a lot of skills I've learned at Bates that might not be something you necessarily see on a transcript when you graduate, but skills nonetheless, just from classes, from professors, from the people that I went to school with. So it was a really wonderful experience. I didn't really want to leave after 4 years, but it's kind of right.
I can just imagine that. But that's so interesting that it gave you the tools to take on anything in this life, basically.
Yeah, I think it really I probably got a lot of those even before and after, but definitely they were developed in many ways there. And they gave that foundation that I could kind of jump from and do many different things.
I love that. So I don't think you went directly into graduate school, but at some point you went to George Mason University, I think.
Yes.
And to get your master's degree. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience? What was that like?
Yeah, that was actually kind of well down the road from Bates. So I was teaching in Korea 1 year when I went there when I was 24, and then I came back after 1 year. I went back to Korea later. And when I was back in Korea, I was teaching in public schools. So how they did it was they had like 100 teachers from all over come do an orientation, and then they divided us up into 100 different public schools, low-income public schools. And that experience was amazing. I did it for a couple years. But I had a lot of friends in Korea that were also teaching in international schools, which is where I teach now. And those schools, it's just a different package. It's more like what you'd imagine from a teacher back home, but I think with a lot of extra benefits as well, maybe like less stress or less pressure that some of the teachers back home deal with. And so when I decided that I really wanted to make that turn to go into international teaching, I had to get more certifications, because even though I've been an education undergrad, I wasn't a certified teacher in any given subject or anything like that.
So Emily, how did you get that first job in Seoul, Korea? Like, so you came out of Bates, and then how did you land that job? How did you make the contact?
Sure. Yeah, I had some in-between time. I was in Idaho for a year, rolling burritos, and then I was in New York.
Nothing wrong with rolling burritos. Who doesn't like a burrito?
I was in New York for a year as well after that, and that's I was working at basically a place. It was called Boys Town. It was a place for kids that had been locked up that were waiting their sentencing. It was a really intense social work job. So I did both of those things before I left. But since I was in college and undergrad, I had made a really good friend from Ireland named Sharon Mitchell. Planted the seed that we should, work someplace internationally, which to me sounded crazy. She was a year older than me, so she was a year out of university before me. So when she had graduated, she was going on a round the world trip for a year. And she was going with this other Irish girl, and I thought they were absolutely insane. Like, they were literally going around the world for a year.
Wow.
So those seeds had been planted, and she took me up to this like little dial-up internet place and showed me pictures of Thailand, and I was like, whoa. And for the first time ever, I was like, yeah, I want to go there. That looks amazing.
Right.
So one thing led to another, and while I was in Idaho rolling burritos, she contacted me to say, hey, I'm applying for a job in Dubai. And I was like, Dubai? That's not Thailand. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
I want to go there. And so even though Dubai's actually amazing, I would, think about working there now. But at the time, that sounded crazy to me. It was in the Middle East. So, and I was in a long-term relationship. So I just wasn't really ready to leave. So she went off to Dubai and did a year there. And then we obviously stayed in contact. And then in Dubai, she got wind from all these teachers there that Korea was like the new hot spot to teach. So she contacted me again at this juncture. I'm in New York, and she's like, we got to apply for this job. So we did. I took the bait. I was like, all right, it's still not Thailand, but all right, I'll apply to Korea.
Close enough.
It's getting closer than Dubai.
So we applied, and much to my surprise, we didn't get the jobs. We got the contact back, and we didn't get the jobs. And I was shocked, because I kind of felt like, from what I heard on the street, which wasn't much, I kind of felt like anyone could get a job teaching there. So I was shocked, because I was actually in education, and everything like that. So anyways, 3 days later, we did get the job. It's basically, we went through a really budget recruiter. And I think that's the reason that we didn't initially get the job, because we didn't go through the correct recruiting agency.
Our listeners are going to want to know, how do you get the best recruiting agency?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, honestly, it changes. And now the internet's a different beast than it was in 2004 when we were looking at this. So I would say, go online, go on chat groups, see what people are saying in the moment. But in that moment, it was Footprints. It was a company out of Canada, because almost all the teachers going were Canadian. So in that moment, that was the company to go with. And I think that's probably changed since then, to be honest. So anyways, we found out we did get the job, but in those 3 days, a lot had changed on Sharon's end because her whole family had like come clean and said they didn't want her to go at all. And, everything came out of order. And
Right.
she had also applied to school in England. So anyway, a long story short, she basically was like, Em, I don't think I can go. And I'm like, I'm going to go anyway. And she was like, you're literally crazy. Like you never even wanted to go abroad like this. And now I
Right.
go, and I'm going to go anyway. And I was like, yeah. So
I'm going. Yeah.
And at the time, I mean, this is literally, this is June of 2005. All this is kind of being chatted about. And at that time, I didn't know anyone who had ever been to Asia to visit, just for like,
right.
Yeah. Never mind teach and live.
Right.
Yeah.
Teach, nothing like that. So this was pretty out of this world. And 2 months later, off I went to Seoul, Korea.
Wow, that's such a great story.
When I got there, there was 199 other teachers. I think 98, because I think Sharon actually had a spot there the whole time. It's pretty funny, but we basically found out that lots of these people were actually super young, just out of school, but certified teachers. So in that moment, it didn't seem as crazy that we hadn't gotten the job initially, even though we didn't have the best recruiter, because people were pretty qualified for the positions, just green, very inexperienced. But if I wanted to work at an international school, I would have needed what a lot of them had, which was my actual official certification.
When you were over there, Emily, hanging out and teaching with these people, you learned a lot.
Yeah, and it was kind of like diving in the deep end because, when you first start teaching, you can do all the student teaching you want, but when you first start teaching in your own classroom, it's a whole new, it's a whole new game. So you have to kind of take it on. And then I think for a lot of people, they might think, oh yeah, maybe I'll do some teaching. And I think for a lot of people, it's actually not the right personality fit. And for me, from the beginning, it always felt like a really good fit.
It was natural.
Yeah, it felt pretty natural.
Yeah.
So down the road, maybe like, I guess that's 2005, 2006. I went back to grad school in 2011. And that's when I got my certification and my master's at the same time.
So when you say certification, what is that called? Like, is it just international certification of some sort, or?
Well, it's a good question because there's lots of different kinds of certifications. So what I did was I got a Virginia state license. Like I can teach in the state of Virginia. It translates to most other states, although not all of them.
But you chose Virginia because it was the most flexible?
I chose it. Yeah, it was super flexible because I could do it online, and It had an international component to it. Most people going to the program wanted to teach internationally with a certification from back home, and it was fast. Like it was called the Fast Train program. It is called the Fast Train program.
Literally.
Yeah. Wow. That suited your lifestyle at the time to be on the fast train.
Because I just had to go back to Virginia during the summers, right outside DC, and the rest of the time I could do my classes online.
Oh, that's perfect. So what made you choose this path, and what type of qualities would help a person to succeed in becoming an international teacher?
I mean, for me, really choosing this path probably had a lot to do with growing up on Nantucket and getting so much exposure to people from other places. So for me, traveling was always interesting to me. It wasn't something I thought I would do my whole life, but I was very intrigued by meeting people from other places. I think that was the initial push. And then when I went,
you get a lot of international visitors on Nantucket?
Probably some, I don't know, but it's more like the people I worked with. So the international college students that were working there were like my greater connection, and people from South America or Europe or things like that. So they were a big influence on me because I was very naive and ignorant and like all the things that I think, many of us Americans are when we travel for the first time outside of the country. We don't really know as much as we might think we know. So.
Right.
And then when I went to school, I got really into teaching. I just took an education class kind of to try it out. And most of my friends complained that there was so many hours because you had a student teach and all this stuff. But I love those classes and I love student teaching. So I found a real affinity with that. And I think if you have the combination of the desire to travel and the combination of actually really enjoying teaching, it's a pretty clear calling that this can be a great fit for you.
And the nice thing is that you got to experience that at Bates, right? That experience of student teaching. Is that where you first got that experience or no?
Yeah, I first did it at Bates. because of the huge Somali influx at the time, I was always in ESL classrooms because that's where they needed the most help. So I wasn't in like just regular classrooms. I was at first, like my first year. And after that, I was always in the ESL rooms trying to help with the, huge influx that they weren't prepared to handle in the public schools yet with all the Somali refugees.
Right. So that's good because you learned early on that you had an affinity towards teaching.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody considering it that's in college, get out there and try it out and see how it goes for you. So can you tell us what the application process is like, Emily, to obtain an international teaching position?
Well, there's two different paths I took. So in Korea, I basically just went through a recruiting agency, filled out some paperwork, got a position, then had to do all the paperwork for the country, getting the visas and things like that. But I think maybe what might be more appropriate for the listeners is if they want to do an international school. And if you want to go into an international school, what you do is you sign up with one of a couple of companies to get your name on a list that the schools are there, and then the students are there as well, the teachers are there as well, so that they can link up. And they link up in job fairs. There's job fairs all over the U.S. Some of the biggest job fairs are if you want to go to South America, the biggest one is in Atlanta, and it's in the first weekend in December. And you go there for the following school year. And it's really the first one of the year. And then there's tons of other ones. The biggest one in the country is in Iowa. And then there's one in Boston every year with Search Associates. There's one in San Francisco every year with Search as well. And then there's several in Canada, so including Toronto and a few other cities. So basically what you do is you sign up through one of these recruiting agencies. ISS is the other big one, and then Search is the other big one. And so
What was that, ISN?
ISF, and what was the other one?
Search Associates and ISS. Right now, I can't think of what that stands for, but I'm pretty sure it's International Schools something, But those two are the big ones. And then if you want to go to the Iowa Fair or the Atlanta Fair, you actually just sign up directly through those fairs. They're not associated with the other two recruiting agencies. And in addition to the ones they have in the States, probably the biggest one in the world is a Search fair that's held in Bangkok every year. It's usually like the first week in January or second week in January. And that's one of the biggest ones in the world because the most international schools are actually located in Asia.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So do you recommend going to as many of these as you can? I mean, you said some of the fairs are location specific, but maybe you don't get your location. So if you can make it to Atlanta and Boston, for example, you probably should do that to improve your odds.
Well, it really depends on what you want to do and where you want to go. So if you know you want to go to South America, I would definitely say go to the fair in Atlanta. If you're feeling completely unsure, I would honestly recommend the fair in Iowa because there's a lot of rookies, younger people that haven't really had that experience, and tons of schools go to that one because it's the biggest one. And then you have your option open. The schools in South America also go to the one in Iowa. It's just a little bit later in the year. It's in usually the first week in February. So, and then it depends on where you want to go. Like if you know for sure you want to go to Asia, it makes a lot of sense to go to the Bangkok fair, but not really if you don't live in Asia. So in that case, I would say probably going to the fair in Boston would be your best bet because lots of schools are going to be there from Asia, Boston or Iowa. San Francisco is also a great choice for people on the West Coast, but it's later. So what happens is I think the Boston one is the week before Iowa, is the week before or 2 weeks before San Francisco. And as you can imagine, the later you go, oftentimes the less availability there is.
Oh, wow. Sure. That's such a great tip, Emily. Is it difficult to land these positions?
It depends. So if you have no experience whatsoever, but you're, a certified teacher, there's a lot of schools that are still willing to kind of take a risk on you, especially if they feel like if you have the right personality and they feel like you're going to stay. What they don't want people leaving after 2 weeks because, they're homesick or, obviously everyone can go through that feeling of homesick, but they want to make you feel like you're going to be able to work through that and continue being there. So, and you're usually signing a 2-year contract at these international schools. So I would definitely say if you have no experience, go give it a try for sure. The Iowa Fair is actually really good for that because there's so many people there that don't have a lot of experience. However, then if you have experience, if you've taught abroad, especially with successful contracts, then you become much higher in demand because you've kind of proven that you can hack it, so to speak. And then they really start looking at your teaching credentials and what your references, and they call around. And as crazy as it sounds, the international school community is actually relatively small. So if you burn bridges in a couple places, that can kind of haunt you later, because everyone knows someone somewhere, or through someone else. Right. There's a lot of personal recommendations going on, that even if it's like a friend of a friend or a colleague of a colleague, something like that.
Even if it's once removed. Yeah. So are there different kinds of positions, like private versus public schools? And
sort of. With these affairs that we're speaking of, really those are mainly private schools. They're usually based in bigger cities. If they're really international, meaning the mix of students, they often are in the capital city, and there's a lot of diplomat children that go there, etc. But then if they're in like a second city or a smaller city, it's usually going to be a lot of local people from that country that are wealthier and have the means to send their kid to a pretty prestigious private school. So that's usually what you're looking at. But in my case in Korea, I was working in a public school, and that was a little different than what we're speaking about right now. That was kind of its own separate recruiting for a program called SMOE that I think has been now adapted to EPIK, EPIK, I believe, that's in Korea, that's specifically for English teachers in public schools.
So, Emily, just out of interest, how was your experience living in Seoul? What's it like to live there?
Yeah, great question. It's awesome. I mean, it kind of, again, depends on what kind of person you are, what your interests are. I mean, when I first got to Seoul, I didn't know any Korean. I didn't know how to eat with chopsticks, which is really embarrassing because not many 24-year-olds don't know how to eat with chopsticks, but I didn't know at all. I couldn't order any food. There was no such thing as takeout then. So you had to eat at the restaurant. You couldn't just you could see food in windows all the time, and you try and order it just to go, and they'd be like, no. And they didn't understand that. So there's a huge learning curve. But
you had to learn how to like kimchi.
Yeah. Obsessed, but it took a little while to find that passion for Korean food, and now it's my favorite food. So I had great friends from that orientation crew that I met. I met 100 other teachers, and we got put in different schools, so we didn't see each other every day, which almost in a way is really nice, because international schools can get kind of claustrophobic at sometimes. But in Seoul, I didn't see anyone that I really hung out with at work. I had my work people and my friends. So it was very separate, and that was kind of a great pleasure. My mom told me after a couple months there, she's like, you're learning more about Canada than Korea. I had a lot of Canadian friends.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And then I started to learn more about Korea and have more Korean friends and learn more about the food and all that. But it takes a little while because you're kind of getting your feet wet and trying to figure things out. But it was an amazing experience. Seoul is one of the biggest cities in the world, and the culture is rich with, music and museums. And there's lots of great activities to do, from jjimjilbangs, where you go and basically just get naked with a bunch of strangers and walk around in different spas and different baths and get scrubbed. It's separated by male and female. Then you go put on a robe and go up to the co-ed area and just sleep in saunas. It's almost impossible to describe, but they're super popular. Of course, they sound amazing, and they are. And then,
amazing.
Yeah, just going to all the different events that would happen, from concerts to events for expats to events that just happen all the time in the city, because it's metropolis. So I really, really enjoyed my time in Seoul for sure.
So
yeah, I'm sure. It sounds fascinating. It sounds like a vibrant city.
Yeah, for sure. What is the best way to decide which country is the right one for you? Do you consider travel risk, and do you consider yourself the norm in terms of travel risk? And how would you address that?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of factors going in. I think it's pretty challenging to just go anywhere without doing your research first. Job opportunities, in Korea, it's totally acceptable to ask how old you are, if you're married. You put a picture on your CV whenever you send it. So there's a lot of superficial things that you're going to get judged on in a country that's so homogenous. And I think that can be super challenging for people. It's challenging also to be a foreigner who's white as an outsider, but I think they look at people from white backgrounds and culture with much more acceptance, because they're used to seeing us in, the limelight on TV and movies, etc. But I actually saw a really cool video about Koreans reacting to Black Panther last year. And they were like, it was really interesting. People were like, oh, I didn't know Black people could be gorgeous. I didn't know Black people could be good guys. Like really kind of simplistic notions. But, you have to keep in mind every country has its own history and its own exposure level. So slowly, I think Koreans are getting more comfortable with people of color. Sure. And I think, when you're a person of color, I think being in South America is more accepting, being in certain parts of Europe is more accepting, and certainly Africa. But there's different challenges with race in Africa as well, because sometimes you're not really seen as Black even when you're Black. So there's all that to factor in. And then for me, I'm gay. So that's a factor where I'm living. Like I want to feel comfortable being who I am. And certainly in Korea, they're slowly coming around to that as well. So there's things that you want to factor in depending on who you are, what your background is, that'll just make you feel more comfortable and more safe in your environment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that goes for being male and female as well. Like almost anywhere, male teachers are going to have an easier adjustment. They're going to have an easier time dating. I'm assuming in this case, straight males, they're going to have an easier time kind of making those connections. And for females, it's often a lot more challenging, and they have to be more aware of safety and just differences that exist around the world, like how women are seen in that culture. They might be seen much less equal than they would be in North America or things like that. So all those things are really important to factor in if you're thinking about staying in a place long term or just really having the highest level of comfort. But at the same time, I highly recommend people trying things that throw them out of their comfort zone. Really just give it a try, and you can always leave. You can always go back home. You don't have to fulfill every day of your contract if you're not comfortable. So I also highly recommend people giving it a try and not just kind of turning their head away because it will be challenging.
That's where the growth comes. You might surprise yourself. I handled that, and
and that builds all sorts of character that you would really appreciate, because you're getting experiences every day that some of your friends back home might not ever get, or at least not in that same capacity.
And it gives you an understanding of the world better. It broadens your horizons.
Certainly, yeah. It builds empathy and builds understanding and awareness.
Sure.
So you have such a tremendous amount of experience with international teaching. As we've talked about, you taught in Seoul, Korea, and I'm going to butcher this, but Maracaibo, Venezuela?
Maracaibo, Venezuela, yes.
Maracaibo, and now Medellin, Colombia. So can you tell us a little bit about each of the places? You've already touched on Seoul a bit, but some of the others, maybe touch on the similarities, the differences, the advantages, disadvantages. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I can touch on all that. So going to Korea felt like going to a different world because it's Asia and the culture is so different. Whereas going to South America feels much more similar to the U.S. or North America. However, that said, Maracaibo and being in Venezuela, I got there in 2012, and Chavez died, the ex-president there died in 2013. And then Maduro took over, who's the current president there, and basically the unraveling of Venezuela was happening in front of my eyes. So that was extremely challenging, even though I love Venezuela. And in fact, it's almost impossible for anyone that travels to make a statement on this, but Venezuela is one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been to, and could make a great argument for the most beautiful. But it was a huge challenge living there, because you go to the grocery store, you're waiting in line for 2 hours, there's almost no food, the shelves are getting more and more empty. You go to an ATM and you're waiting in line for hours to try and get money out. So it wasn't like that when I arrived, but it quickly went downhill. And Venezuela is the only place where no one's ever visited me, because I told everyone, don't visit me here, it's too dangerous. And I don't say that. So
you don't say that lightly. Yeah, right. It's really sad what's going on in Venezuela, and I'm sure it breaks your heart because you have a fondness for that country.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that I live in Colombia, Venezuelans are streaming in over the border, and anyone that knows me here knows that I'm always looking out for them, trying to help them out with money, trying to listen to what they have to say. I have a lot of Venezuelan friends from my old school that have moved here, and basically none of my friends in Venezuela are still there because they all had the education opportunity to try and move out. It wasn't even that they were wealthy, they just had the opportunity from working at the international school to get jobs elsewhere. Yeah, that was a whole other challenge, but at the same time, I really did enjoy Venezuela because of the natural beauty of the landscape, from the beaches to the mountains to the, you're in the Amazon in the southern part of Venezuela. So it's very dynamic. And Colombia is actually really similar to Venezuela in the landscape. Once upon a time, they were the same country along with Panama and Ecuador. And Colombia has such a rich history as well. There's tons of similarities between Venezuela and Colombia. However, right now, sometimes those are harder to see because of the economic crisis of Venezuela. But Colombia is incredible. Medellin, of the places I've lived, Medellin the most enjoyable for me for many reasons.
Right. And, when people in the United States, probably especially, think of Colombia right away, they think, oh, Colombia, you can't go there. But You've been living there for over 2 years.
Almost 4 years, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Almost 4 years. So.
Time flies.
Colombia's amazing. Yeah. I met someone when I was traveling in Asia back in 2006, I believe, and they had gone to Colombia, an American couple, and they told me, oh no, it's amazing, you got to go. And I really did want to go, but I felt like at that time it was so unsafe, and they gave me a lot of confidence to give it a try. And then from that moment on, if I kept my ears open, it was just one great thing after Colombia, then the next thing. People love Colombia for good reason. It's an incredible country. The people are really warm. Colombia has been voted the happiest country in the world, I think, a few years in a row now. And it's not that they don't have their problems. They've been dealing with civil war. They've had lots of issues in their history, but I think it's a perspective of how we look at life, what we appreciate in life. And I think they do a really amazing job of valuing some of the things that are really actually important. So
I met a guy from Medellin last year, and he was so proud to be from there. Yes. He's living in the United States now, but he couldn't have been more proud of his country.
Yes.
And Medellin specifically. Yeah.
In Medellin, they're called paisas here in the state of Antioquia, and they are particularly proud. They have a lot of natural resources. They've kind of grown to be the most successful state because of and in spite of Pablo Escobar, the drug cartel dealer from the 80s and 70s and 80s a bit, but mainly the 80s, who, became rich and poured money into the city. But people are also trying to get over the image he created. So it's like they're extra motivated to do well, to kind of diminish his image. So
they don't want the association, and that makes sense.
Correct. Yeah, it's correct.
So when you say they have I can't remember how you phrased it, but basically their priorities in order of what's important, what did you mean by that?
I think, for example, no matter where you are in Colombia, if people put on music, everyone comes together, everyone's dancing. It's an immediate connection. It's almost like a feeling of family just because of music. And I think that's something that we don't really have in the States. And the value on family here is, I haven't seen it quite like this. Like obviously in Asia and Korea, there's a huge family value and respecting of your elders and things such as this. But in Colombia, there's this connection between family that it's stronger than anything I've ever seen. And it just permeates the whole country and creates that feeling of warmth. And people here are really, really warm to each other. And I think, like, if you ever want to take a screaming kid on a flight and you don't know where to go to Colombia. They won't just yell at you. They'll literally like take your kid and try and help you, and not because they feel bad for you. They love the kid and they want to help them, and it's just this level of warmth.
It's a natural reaction they have. It's just they just want to help. That's awesome.
Yeah. And they're not, although they work really hard, especially where I'm at in Medellin, people work really hard, but they're not obsessed with work. One of the things that saddens me sometimes thinking about the States is how people are so obsessed with work that they kind of can't have anything else really happening in their lives at times. And I think people in Colombia have a greater sense of like all the things that are important, not just, your success financially, making money or furthering your career. It's many other things that go into that feeling of success.
Yeah, I can see where that creates such a warm environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Besides the places you've taught through your teaching, it's brought you to a lot of other countries as well, right? Can you just quickly touch on where else you've been?
Oh, It's a lot of countries. I think it's somewhere around 50 or 60. And basically, I've been all over most of Asia. Not so much in the stands area, but all over Northeast and Southeast Asia, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, things like that. And then I spent a lot of time in Europe because I studied in Europe when I was in university. So I've been all over Western Europe and a few places in Eastern Europe. And then I've been really now almost all over South America and lots of Central America, lots of places in North America.
Is that typical for international student to be able to get, obviously they have to teach at different places, parts of the world, but is that typical to be able to easily travel? Say you're in Seoul, Korea teaching. Is it pretty typical to be able to hit most of Southeast Asia and India?
Yes, if you're motivated to do so. I think most people that teach abroad are motivated to do so. And so your vacation times and your non-school days, people use that a lot to travel. So I think with the population that I live and work with and spend time with, it's not that unusual. It's more unusual for my friends back home who don't live this same lifestyle.
Sure. That brings me to my next question. So do you guys get paid enough to be able to, afford a decent living over there and obviously to afford to do some travel? It sounds like, maybe you made that your priority, but it sounds like you made at least enough money to have some comforts that way.
Yeah, that really also depends. That's another huge factor when deciding where to go. The best paying schools are all in Asia. So if a lot of people are driven to go to South America, but they pay quite a bit less than schools in Asia. And so really what you want to look at isn't even what your salary is, it's what you are able to save each year. They call it your savings potential because, for example, in Singapore, you might make $100,000 a year teaching in an international school, but your savings potential is like $5,000 because the country's so expensive. So it really depends on where you're at. China's famous for having one of the highest saving potentials. The Middle East is famous for that as well. But it depends on what you want to do. So, for example, when I was in Venezuela, I was making tons of money because I was getting paid all in U.S. dollars and the economic crisis was happening. So that the Bolivar kept crashing and the dollar got stronger and stronger. So at one point I was kind of like a millionaire. I mean, I joke it'll be my only chance to be a millionaire, especially as a teacher.
Absolutely.
And then when I was in Korea, I actually had a lot of money. I felt like I had plenty of money for my lifestyle, but I was also working a lot. I worked a lot of tutoring. I worked, more like a U.S. kind of 60, 70 hours a week type thing. Now in Colombia, I'm probably making less money than either of those places as far as savings potential, but my lifestyle feels much healthier. Kind of depends on what you want to do. The hardest thing is, I just went to Europe over winter break, and that's challenging because you're making pesos and then you're going to spend euro. That's tough. Or going home to Nantucket in the summer and everyone wants to go out to dinner and it's like $200 a head. And that's just not kind of money that I really want to spend right now on a dinner,
Right. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. But at the same time, if I'm just staying in South America, especially when I'm just here in Colombia, I mean, I'm very well off within the country. Not like rich, but definitely upper middle class.
Right.
So that, that makes life easy here. It's just, I think for people that have loans back home and things like that, responsibilities back home, it's important to think about what money you're going to make and what you can save and where you should go.
Well, that's such a good process to think about it because, like you said, if you don't have any American loans or obligations here, then it's all relative unless you're traveling home.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Also, Emily, do they help with housing? Do they cover your medical costs? Do they, give you a stipend for spending or anything like that?
Yeah, those are also really great questions. Basically, any good, reputable international school is going to provide you airfare home every year or at least after each contract. They're going to provide you solid health care, probably better than most stuff that teachers have back home. They're going to provide you housing, an apartment, basic level of furniture and things that you need. And then, that's kind of the main things. It depends on the school. Some schools will even pay for, your utilities and things like that. Other schools, you're expected to take that out of your monthly salary. So it kind of depends. But when you look at the whole package of what you get, it's usually a lot bigger than what you see at first, because at first you're just looking at the salary. And most of the salaries have, maybe in Asia, but most places are not quite as strong as the salary you might see in the States, but then you might not lose anything to taxes. You might not have to pay for an apartment. You might not have to pay for your transportation. There's a lot of things that factor in as well, and they're important when you're looking at what job fits for you.
That makes sense. Do you usually end up with a roommate, or do you have your own pad?
I've never had a roommate. I think some schools still do that, but they realize they're just not that competitive when they do that. Some people choose to have a roommate, and that's different. But almost all the schools that nowadays, they're offering you your own place. Like my school that I'm working at right now in Medellin, I think like 7 years ago, they required you to have a roommate your first contract, your first 2 years, and maybe like 6 or 5 before I got here 4 years ago. They took that out because they realized they were losing a lot of potential teachers because of that one piece. So I think that's pretty much a thing of the past at this point, unless you choose it.
So everybody gets their own apartment. That's pretty nice.
Yeah, I think that's critical.
So did you find that you had good internet everywhere, every country you go to, or is that like a luxury of...
It's kind of hit and miss. Like obviously in Korea, it's like the fastest internet in the world. So that was pretty solid.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
In Venezuela, it kind of just depended. Like it wasn't so much my internet in my apartment. It's more like there could be a problem with the entire internet company in that area of the country, and then everyone's dealing with it, Or just things like if in Venezuela, if I had a problem, sometimes it would take weeks or a month to get someone over there to fix it because people were dealing with so much going on there that people weren't really like driven to work really hard. In Colombia, if I have a problem with my internet, someone will probably be here that day or the next day at the latest. Sometimes it feels a little off at like school in the city, and then it's kind of for everybody. But for the most part, like not having Wi-Fi hasn't been an issue at all. Like I almost never think about like, oh, I wish the Wi-Fi were better.
Yeah, that's great, because keeping in touch at home is probably helps in the success rate of staying in another country. I'm curious, Emily, what do they do to help you make that transition? Like when you first get there, is somebody there to, I don't know, meet you at the airport and then, make you feel welcome, show you to your apartment, those types of things that can make easier transition?
Yeah, 100%. They meet you at the airport. You might be coming in by yourself. You might be coming in with several other teachers at once. They bring you to your apartment, and usually they have some basic, things, food and things like that in your apartment. So toilet paper, that kind of stuff that you need right away, so that you're ready to go. And if you don't feel like you can leave the next day right away and go shopping on your own, you already have things. And then most international schools do like a week at least of orientation. And the first few days usually have nothing to do with your job. It's more like getting acquainted to the city, getting, anything you need for your apartment, from pots and pans to plants and things like that. Learning where your closest grocery store is. They take you there. You might be with just someone from HR. You might be with a couple other teachers. And then after a few days of that, and they do a lot of activities to kind of get you to know the people you came in with, your cohort. And then after that, you usually spend a few days getting acclimated to the school and getting ready for, the school year to start and things like that. So no, I would say they do a really good job of making you feel welcome.
That sounds perfect. So just to change directions just a tad, going back to Korea, you had a really fascinating experience playing on the Korean national rugby team? Can you tell us about that?
I pretty much played rugby everywhere I've gone. So I played rugby in Korea, I played rugby in Venezuela, I played rugby in Colombia. But in Korea, because rugby was brand new there for women and really for men, we founded the first rugby team, which actually we're going to have our 15-year reunion next year, I think, in Korea.
Oh, fun. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was 2005. And so at the time, there really wasn't any female rugby. And we basically just had expats, and mainly just Canadians, a couple Kiwis, a couple Aussies, a couple Americans.
What do the Kiwis know about rugby? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, they were running the team. So yeah.
I'm sure they were.
And then we started picking up a few Koreans here and there. But basically what happened was they wanted to kick off a Korean national women's team, and they really didn't have any Koreans to do it. So they kind of kicked it off with us. And I didn't even really realize we were being identified as the Korean national rugby team until we went to a tournament in Japan. And they announced like the Japanese national rugby team, Korean national rugby team. And everyone's looking at it like, one team's all Asian and one team's all white pretty much. And they're like, who's Japanese and who's Korean, you know?
Yeah, right.
Oh my gosh.
So now, they do have officially a all Korean women's rugby team now. And basically our team really helped start that. So, and we were technically it for a while. So yeah, the girl that ran the team still runs the team, Natalie. Shout out to Nat. She's still
Natalie.
She's still in Korea running the team and doing an amazing job. So yeah, it's pretty powerful.
How do you get to work every day in Medellin?
Well, I moto up a hill that's about 13K. I take my 125 moto. It's a little semi-automatic. It's not that big. But most people at my school take school provided transportation and buses. Benefit of a moto, you go on your own time. It's faster. You leave when, you can leave earlier, things like that. And I also bike up. I'm taking a little pause from that, but I've been biking up for the last 2 years. I usually bike up about twice a week, and then I take the moto up about 3 times a week. Yeah. Basically, you decide what you want to do. I would say at my school, probably 30% of the expat hires have their own transportation. Probably about 60 or 70% take the school provided transportation that's free.
That's interesting.
I was just going to circle back to the last thing we were talking about. So when you go back for your reunion, are you guys going to try to catch a rugby game, a rugby match?
Yeah, I hope so. There's actually we haven't made the final plans yet, and there's going to be the Olympics in Japan in July and August, so we might link up for that too.
Oh, there you go. That'll be excellent.
Another little adventure story I just want to touch on quickly. Didn't you hike Patagonia? I mean,
yes.
What was that like? It's definitely off the beaten path here, but that's a pretty unique experience, I would think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, I've gone on so many hikes in so many different places. I mean, Patagonia is fantastic, but there's so much amazing hiking to do everywhere. Patagonia I went to when I was living in Venezuela, and I hiked the W Trek, which is in the Chilean side of Patagonia. There's also the O Trek, which is the W, but doubled, and you camp on the backside. You can't stay at the little, what do you call those, cabins or whatnot.
Right.
But it was absolutely fantastic. Patagonia is incredible. I mean, it's hard because for me, Patagonia was a dream to go there for so long. And when I got there, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, it lived up to my dream in so many ways. But I love hiking. So I find hiking wherever I go. I've done amazing hiking here in Colombia, or Machu Picchu is really famous as well in Peru, and that was incredible. Or, in Nepal, or there's just so many insane places to go hiking. So yeah, Patagonia is absolutely fantastic.
Do you have a favorite?
God, no. It's when people ask for favorites, I usually say try and give me an adjective, and I can try and give you a favorite based on the adjective, because pick out of the
right. That's a fair request.
Right, absolutely. So on another topic, you did a Spanish immersion program, if I'm not mistaken, in Guatemala. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, Guatemala is famous for their Spanish immersion courses. You stay with a host family, which really is kind of hard to explain just how much that adds to the experience, because you have a connection. You eat meals with them, you practice Spanish with them. Sometimes there's other students staying with you, sometimes they have kids or pets. So I think that's the reason it's so successful in Guatemala. It's not like you're just going to class and then you go off on your own. You have a real connection to the community. And I studied in several different places within Guatemala, including Quetzaltenango, which is known basically by everyone as Shayla, which is also the name of my dog. I named her after the city. And then I studied in San Pedro, which is by Lake Atilan, and that's also a really well-known place to study, although Shayla's probably the most famous for the immersion courses. And I also studied in Antigua, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a beautiful colonial town just outside of Guatemala City, which is the capital. And Guatemala is one of my favorite countries in the world. It has a very special place in my heart. The food's amazing. The people are amazing. I don't say the food's amazing everywhere in the Americas, but in Guatemala, southern Mexico, the food is amazing. And yeah, it was just an absolutely incredible experience in San Pedro. I even got really involved in the community. I played basketball everywhere I went, and there I was coaching a team of like local men who were playing basketball, and my Spanish was really minimal at the time. So it was this little gringa girl teaching us how to play basketball.
It just doesn't add up, does it?
Yeah, no, one of the guys on the team, like, he's like, hey, I think you can help us out a lot. We really want you to coach us. And I was like, we or you? Because this is like,
right.
I don't know if you all want me coaching them, but it was actually a really amazing experience. Yeah.
Oh, that's really awesome. How is your Spanish today?
My Spanish today, we should ask my girlfriend, but she would say it's gotten really good. I would say I'm at a B2 level. So if you're looking at levels of Spanish, it's A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. Basically, no one's C2 even in their native language unless you teach the language. So right. C1 is where most of us live. But I'm not there. I could argue that I'm B2, but it's a huge step to get to C1. But I feel definitely comfortable to do almost all the things in Spanish. And, sometimes it's difficult to understand certain people, certain accents. But for the most part, I feel like I can pretty easily navigate myself through most situations with my Spanish and really enjoy spending time with people in Spanish, which is great.
What do you think was the best way to learn it? Was it the Guatemalan experience, or is it just living in Colombia for so long? Or
for me, the best way to really learn is definitely what I did in Guatemala, because here in Colombia, I don't speak Spanish as much as I wish I did, because when I'm at work or I'm out socializing with other expats, I'm usually speaking in English. So, depending on the days, like this weekend I was out of town and I spoke a ton of Spanish because I was navigating different situations, but it just kind of depends on what you're doing. But if you really want to learn the language, I highly recommend the immersion courses because they're really affordable. There's so much included with them, and you just get exposure to Spanish. It's not 24 hours a day, but almost. And if you wanted it to be 24, you could do that too. You just wouldn't hang out with any other expat.
Right. Good to know. I just also want to ask you just a real quick description, but your time at Boys Town, that seemed like a really interesting experience. Just thought if one was considering that program, if you could just tell a little bit about it.
Yeah, hardest job I've ever had in my life. It was incredible. I worked in New York City. In Brooklyn, in a boys' home. The boys had been arrested, and they were awaiting their trials to see if they were going to go to juvie jail, or if they were going to go home on, either getting off or getting probation, something like that. So some of them were in there for just a couple of weeks. Some of them were in there for months awaiting their trial. A lot of them were in there for possession of guns. And really what it was my first taste of culture, because a lot of times we miss culture in our own country. I got a lot of culture within my own country during that experience. In my time there, I probably saw a couple hundred kids, and there wasn't one white kid that came through there. One Asian kid came through, and the rest were Black and Latino. I was the only white person that worked there. I was 22 years old, so I was by far the youngest person working there. And I was the only female on my rotation, my group. So it was incredibly challenging. But students give me really interesting compliments sometimes, like, miss, you just got swag, or like, you just, know this, that. And I don't really know where that comes from, but I feel like a lot of that was probably learned out of survival at Boys Town, because I just kind of faked it till I made it, because it was terrifying. Like I would literally, probably the first 2 months I worked there, I didn't sleep much, and I'm a really good sleeper, because it was so challenging. But I didn't quit. I kept going. I worked there. I only worked there for 7 months. I left the job when I moved to Korea. But when I came back, I'm still friends with all those guys I work with, and I went back to meet up with them. The first time I came back, I went up to meet up with them, and they're all like, yo, they've been trying to hire these white people, and no one's been able to hack it. So they hired this one guy, Matt Johnston, which was funny. I remember the name because I knew like 3 Matt Johnstons. I guess it's a pretty popular white boy name.
Yeah, but sure.
I hired a boy named Matt Johnston. They said he went out for a snack, like for his break, and he just ran away and never came back. So.
That says a lot for you, Emily, that you were able to stick with it and just make it through. And that probably gave you a lot of tools.
How did you best connect with the kids? Was it through basketball or something?
Yeah, it was through basketball. None of the staff really liked taking the kids out, because it was just kind of like more to manage. Like they might get in fights. That it was kind of like preventing anything bad from happening. But I kind of had the flip perspective. I felt like if they were doing something, they were less likely to get in fights because they were spending energy. And you can imagine like a little Brooklyn cement backyard. It's about the size of someone's, bedroom or smaller. And we didn't have a hoop or anything. We just played with this recycling bin. And, I'm decent at basketball, and these guys were all like 15. So I was the person to beat on our little court back there. And so yeah, as soon as I walked in the door for my shift, because I worked the same time every day from 2 o'clock when they got out of school till like 10 o'clock. And as soon as I walked in, they'd be like, "Can we all play basketball?" Because they kind of knew that I'd take them out. So yeah, I did make a lot of connections and playing cards, because they couldn't stay out that late. So we'd come back in, we'd have to do all the chores. But we played a lot of cards, and I learned so many card games from them. And they never wanted to invite me in because they're like, "She doesn't know how to do any of this. She doesn't know how to play." And I didn't. They were totally right. I just watched them play, looking for an opening. And then one time someone was missing, and they're like, we need someone. They're like, "Miss, can you play?" And I was like, yeah, I couldn't. The game was spades, and I just kind of watched them. But I came in, I made one stupid move, and they all gave me a really hard time. And then after that, I won, like, me and my partner ran the table for the night. So then it was like, and I was like in with the cards, then they invited me to play all the time. You got to make your inroads when you can. You got to jump on. Don't say no when they ask you to play cards. It's like Tom Brady. You don't know if you'll ever get the chance again. You better go in like.
That's right. Guns blazing.
Shout out to Tom Brady.
Yeah, right. Just a little shout out to Tom Brady.
Oh, I hope we didn't lose listeners in that shout out.
And one never knows. So, Emily, what would you say you learned the most, like the most profound thing you would take away from this experience?
I teach English, and I think that's an important skill to have in life, but I think there's so many things that teachers teach in the classroom that have nothing to do with your academics or even your language. And so what I say to them all the time, I'm like, what is the one thing we're taking, my ninth graders, I say, what is the one thing we're taking away from ninth grade English? And now they know. They're like, empathy. And that's it. Like,
yeah.
Empathy is what's bringing us to the future. Like, if we can't have empathy for people who are in a different position than what we are from, we can't go anywhere, because we have to be able to step outside of what we know, what we feel comfortable with, all the privilege that we have that we don't even realize that we have. And we have to really be able to try and look at things from other people's positions. And I think when you travel and you experience the world and you see all these different countries and you learn that things that you thought that you did the best, you had no idea what you were doing, or things that you took as a truth that everyone knew, like no one else even thinks that's true, and they don't even want to think that's true. Like, you learn to adapt and to change and to take the best pieces and to leave some of the worst pieces. And I think it just gives you a real understanding and a way to connect with people around the world. So, I mean, I think that's a huge lesson, but I don't know any lesson that's bigger than that. So I would go with
I love that.
I love that too. And you hear all the time, maybe you don't have to become an international teacher, but everybody says, just travel, get out there, experience the world. That does build empathy.
For sure.
Yeah. So see if you can give, like, I don't know, 1-word answers, or maybe 2 or 3, but
we're wrapping it up here. We're bringing it home.
Rapid fire here. So, okay, what would you say is the best thing about being an international teacher?
I would say most people would say traveling. I would say traveling and teaching, because I really like both.
Okay. The worst?
Worst, probably for me, I think you tend to be friends with who you work with when you're an international teacher. And I like to have a mix, like, of friends outside of work, and that's more challenging. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, but it's not horrible. It's just a challenge.
Right. It's just something you got to recognize and change if you can. All right. Scariest.
Ooh. I'm failing the quiz.
You know what? You don't even have to answer that, because I think your pause speaks volumes. Right. It says a lot about your personality. You just don't find it scary.
I don't find it scary. I mean, there's things that are scary. Like, I got in a bike accident. That was scary, but that could have happened anywhere. Or you have a really scary bus driver or something like that happened to me in Nepal, but that could happen anywhere. I don't know. It's not one thing. It's just one specific situation that could happen to you,
Absolutely. Okay. How about the most thrilling?
Most thrilling, meeting new people, new culture, seeing, I just had one of my best old friends from home visit me here. We were friends, when we were like 22 in Nantucket, and he came to visit. I haven't talked to him in years, and it's his first time out of the country. Imagine, like, watching a little kid, like, watching a 4-year-old walking around and seeing the world through their eyes. When you travel, you're like a child again, because everything's new.
Right. Christmas Eve every day. That ends the rapid fire section, Emily. You did a great job.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think anybody that is interested in teaching abroad definitely must have gained a lot from this conversation.
Yeah, you had a lot of great information, Emily. We really appreciate your time with us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
All right. No worries. Thanks for having me.
So that was an awesome conversation with Emily, don't you think?
Yeah, I could listen to her all day. She has so much energy and enthusiasm for teaching and life.
I mean, she could almost talk me into teaching internationally. It sounds so intriguing.
Well, jump right into that, Meg.
I just might.
You might. What great information and tips she provided to all of our listeners who are looking to become an international teacher.
Well, thank you again, Emily, for coming on the show. You were amazing. And as a final note, anyone interested in learning more about our business, academic and career advising services, we invite you to visit our website, and we will include that link in the show notes. We assist people with changing careers, possibly finding that first job out of college, the college admissions process, selecting an academic major, deciding on a career, or things of that nature. You can check it all out on our website, Academic and Career Advising Services. We are located in Kennebunk, Maine. However, for your convenience, we also offer video conferencing services. You're never too old to change your career or to go back to college, and you're never too young to begin thinking about your future. We enjoy serving people of all ages.
If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast and would like to help us out, could you please leave a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts?
This really helps others to find our podcast.
We would greatly appreciate it. Also, to get all the latest on upcoming episodes, please follow us on social media. All of those links will be included in the show notes. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks so much for listening.